officer of the Stockbridge-Munsee Community Band of Mohican Nation, the people of the waters that are never still. Dr. Bendremer received his PhD from the University of Connecticut and has more than 30 years of experience in anthropology and archaeology as an educator and administrator, particularly with regards to partnerships with governmental agencies and Native American communities. His presentation today discusses the important work of preserving and protecting Mohican sites and cultural resources throughout the nation's tribal homeland. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'll just say a couple of specific um, aspects of my career that have been well important for the position that I now hold. Prior to this, I was the NAGPRA coordinator for the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation for the state of New York. And so I had NAGPRA responsibilities for over 180 state parks and 37 state historic sites, not to mention the 4 million cataloged items in the Peebles Island, historic preservation repository for the state of New York. But prior to that, I've kind of bounced between academia and working on the tribal side. Um, I I was a professor of Native American Studies for 6 years at Salish Kootenai College, which is the tribal college on the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana. And there I designed and established the bachelor's degree in tribal historic preservation, so a 4-year degree. It's the only degree in tribal historic preservation in the country. And before that, I was 10 years directing the historic preservation program for the Mohican tribe of Connecticut. And then prior to that, I was a tenure track professor at Indiana University. So I've sort of like bounced around between academia and what I call practice. So now I consider myself a senior practitioner. So that's the but I'm very glad to be in this position. I feel kind of funny giving this talk because I feel like Nathan could give this talk as easily as I can, since he is my predecessor here. So it does feel funny that he asked me to give it. Maybe next time I'll ask him to give it. Uh, I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see what happens. Hopefully you can see can anyone verify that you can see
Yeah,
my,
looks good.
all right, that's what we like to see. Right, let's see. And my Zoom function works okay. The funny thing is that I need to be able to, there we go. So the reason I call this little talk the uneasy history is because Native American people communities have oftentimes been at odds with archaeologists over the years, and this is something that, as an archaeologist who spent virtually my entire career working with Native communities, it's always in the forefront of my mind as I proceed. How has my um, discipline affected the community, and what can I do to help to reconcile what I think to be an important and useful um, profession with communities that have been wronged in the past by archaeologists and archaeology. So we'll just launch right into that. Just a little bit about the Stockbridge-Munsee community. This is we actually do 75 counties in 8 states, and this is sort of like a breakdown of our area of interest. It includes the traditional homelands, but also other places that Stockbridge-Munsee ancestors lived, as well as the current reservation in north central Wisconsin. So this is gives you a sense of the extent to which we try to project the interests of the Stockbridge-Munsee in its heritage in all of these places. So automatically, this is sort of where I start out, because this is where, you know, archaeology in a sense has its history going back, digging stuff from the, you know, who has dug materials, native heritage from the ground. And these are a couple of, Slack Farm is in Kentucky is really famous uh, for um, for looting, and other places around the country. But this is something that goes back a long ways. This is this quote at the bottom is has to do with pilgrims in Plymouth in the 1620s actually excavating a burial. And so this is the sort of thing that's been going on for forever. And of course, this is an anathema in Native culture to dig up the dead in this fashion. It is the legacy of our discipline. And when you, sorry about that, it's my phone. And if you look at archaeology from a Native perspective, there isn't a whole lot of difference from where the tribe sits from its perspective. It's hard to distinguish the action of looting and the actions of archaeologists. And this is something that other folks and myself have points that we have made, that archaeology and looting from a tribal perspective are hard. They're hard to distinguish in the minds of the tribal communities. So this is where this is kind of like situates us in the history of our profession. And I know that many of you may be professional archaeologists or have done archaeology in the past, and so this is something that is a difficult idea for many tribes. So this is Larry's a quote from Larry Zimmerman. Archaeologists claiming to speak for past peoples, and this is something that can be actually really maddening, I think, for Native people, is that archaeologists, anthropologists, really, including archaeologists, set themselves up as the experts on them, and also at the same time often have denigrated or ignored or devalued Native people as experts on themselves, and Native knowledge, oral tradition, and other aspects uh, indigenous knowledge that so archaeologists, anthropologists as scientists, right? They're the ones that have the ability to better explain and be speak with authority on Native peoples. And this is a really a maddening um, concept, I think, in tribal communities. And I will say that I can expound upon terrible stories of archaeologists and anthropologists and their and how they have done, in many cases, done a terrible job as stewards of the past and stewards of culture. So the implication that is sometimes made that that Native people themselves aren't prepared or uh, don't have the capacity to steward these, you know, their heritage and as well as material culture, it's maddening considering that we've oftentimes done a very poor job. And I have all kinds of disasters sort of in the back of my mind I'm thinking of when I say that. Um, these are some additional quotes that I have about native perspectives on archaeology. I'll read the middle one just really quickly because I wrote it. Published this in the Cambridge University Press, ethics, archaeological ethics. Despite good intentions, great harm has often been brought to indigenous communities who did not agree with or fully understand the goals, methods, or long-term ramifications of participation in anthropological studies. Uh, in addition to the divergent interests of host communities and the anthropologist's career interests, which oftentimes I think, I'll say this as a former tenure track professor, that oftentimes our career interests as professors are specifically um, abrogate native interests in some very unfortunate ways. So there are additional tensions between paternalism and community autonomy. These arise as a result of differing conceptions of what constitutes benefit for a host community. So that's something that I wrote a while back. And I'll touch on that publication a little bit later since that is on ethics, which is extremely important from where we stand as practitioners in the 21st century that are trying to rectify some of the the unfortunate effects of our professional predecessors. So, as I'm sure many of you know, there are a number in the 20th century, there are a number of laws that were instituted which form the basis of the tools by which a tribal historic preservation office like ours, or for that matter, a state historic preservation office, not that much difference, um, uh, we act under these laws. These are the tools. This is the toolkit that we have at our disposal to do our work, starting with the Antiquities Act and going all the way up through NAGPRA, but including in particular the uh, 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 Archaeological and Historic Preservation Act and ARPA in 1979. Um, by the way, my office is arranged a little differently than some THPO offices. I do all of the compliance work under these various laws except for NAGPRA. And Bonnie Hartley, who's the manager of our office and a tribal citizen, is the one who works on the NAGPRA. And if I'm asked to support her in that role, I do so. And what I oftentimes say is that if it's in the ground, I try to keep it in the ground. If it's out of the ground, Bonnie tries to get it back in the ground. So that's how our office is arranged. In some places, the THPO does both. So when those various laws mean that when there's construction activity that either is funded by a state or federal source or is needs to be permitted by a state or federal permitting action, that we are automatically consulted under Section 106 of the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. And so this is just a few pictures of what it looks like when we're out in the field consulting, oftentimes monitoring construction activity. Sometimes we find artifacts like in the upper right. We meet with lots of folks with complicated drawings, and we talk about and we do a lot of hiking in the mountains. The Berkshires are beautiful, and there's the lower right. By the way, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but I'm coming to you from our office in Williamstown, Massachusetts. on the campus of Williams College in the beautiful Berkshire. So that's where I'm coming to you tonight. So this takes up a fair amount of our time, is consulting and going out into the field, either monitoring or looking at plans, construction, and that kind of thing. So this was our 2023, and I realize it's just about the end of 2024, and I'll be doing this again. But last calendar year, we did over 22. We consulted on over 2,200 federal undertakings, 1,100 non-federal consultations, 36 site visits. We consulted with 18 federal offices and agencies, 20 state and local agencies, 5 other tribes consulted, 9 conferences attended, and 223 other meetings. So that's just a little snapshot. I'm pretty sure that this year will be even more. We're inundated by requests to consult. Obviously, when you're talking about 75 counties in 8 states, we're getting a lot of requests for notices of consultation. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This might be a good time for maybe a question or two, and then I'm going to go into some specific projects and areas of interest of our office and make this hopefully a little more fun. Or I can just continue ahead.
If anybody's got questions, you can just do the little hand raise thing. Okay.
That's my summary anyway of what our office does. I'm going to now talk about some specific areas of interest, and one of those is archaeological field schools. This was an initiative that for me is kind of personal because I have personally directed 21 archaeological field schools in my career. So 21 years of field schools. I did 4 for the University of Connecticut, 15 in partnership with the Mohican tribe of Connecticut, where the credit was issued by Eastern Connecticut State University, and then 2 out of Salish Kootenai College, the tribal college on the Flathead Indian Reservation. But one of the problems that we have with archaeological field schools is that when they're good, they're very good, and when they're bad, it can be a real problem. And so I would just point out that, for example, we have a tribal citizen here doing archaeology. This past summer, we the Stockbridge-Munsee community, the Delaware tribe, and the Delaware Nation sponsored an archaeological field school. And so we had, I think it was 7 or 8 tribal citizens who came out and participated in the field school. When I was doing our field school in partnership with the Mohican tribe, I had 42 tribal members who took the course over the 6-credit course over the 15 years that we did it. And in fact, many of those graduates of our field school went on to become either members of the tribal council or the council of elders. It kind of became a little bit of an accomplishment that was good for people who wanted to sort of get up into leadership in the tribal government. And so it went on year after year after year. The tribe did not want to suspend it. It was originally founded because the tribe, when it first received federal recognition in 1994, they literally had no ability to pay for archaeological services. And I suggested, well, we could do a course because I had already done 4 years of UConn's archaeological field school. And they said, okay, that's a good idea. But of course, down the line after Mohegan Sun and so on, they had no problem really getting archaeological services because they were, had that resource, those resources, but they didn't want to stop because it became such an institution there. So, and with so many tribal members doing it and getting a very close experience, a very intimate experience with their ancestors through the archaeological field school. So it just kept on going and was quite an institution there. But when it comes to field schools, these are the problems that we've been finding with some. They have a terrible, oftentimes terrible documentation, sometimes little or no processing, little or no cataloging, little or no analysis, no reports or publishing. The collections curation can be terrible. No consultation with tribes. There's no requirement for it. There's sometimes poor curriculum, a lack of teaching objectives or evaluation, and questionable oversight of students in the field. And I've seen all of these things or in combination with archaeological field schools. And this has become for us a kind of an initiative where we really want to sort of reel in what these professors are doing. And this is one of the last areas of what I would call the Wild West in archaeology, that basically professors feel like they can do anything they want in any way that they want, under the explanation of academic freedom. And so this has been a real problem. And I'll show you an example. These are 4 different pictures, by the way. But this is an archaeological field school that was held in let's just say the Hudson Valley, many years. And this is what the collection looks like. These are unprocessed, uncatalogued, unanalyzed faunal remains from an incredibly important native village. And they're just sitting there in bags. You can see here's again some uncatalogued materials. These are still in the bags when the students basically put them in there, and they're just put in boxes and then on shelves. And likewise over here. So there's been literally nothing done. And that professor will just put these things away and then get paid and then go out and dig the next year with a new batch of students. So all of this, and this is the sort of thing that we hate to see in a tribal historic preservation office. And so we created a protocol for field work in the homelands, and this would apply to field schools. And this was we had student interns that helped us here at Williams College that help with the layout here. It's a very nice little brochure that we have, a little trifold brochure. And as you can see down in here, this publication, ethics in archaeology, and what we propose is that institutional review boards. I don't know if we have any college professors but we feel like institutional review boards at colleges should use the principles of human subjects research and apply that as it is applied to cultural anthropological research or psychology, or whenever there's human subjects being looked at in a project out of a college. The institutional review board reviews that under the rubrics of the Belmont Report: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So we really feel like that needs to be applied to archaeological field school because it affects the tribal communities. But ordinarily archaeology is exempt from these things in the college. We feel that needs to change, and some of these other rubrics that we want going forward. So that's one thing that we are doing that's a kind of interest, and we're trying our best to encourage these ethics across the region at the colleges and universities. Another project that we worked on recently has to do with Papscony Island, and this is actually in just south of Albany, as you can see up here. It doesn't really look much like an island. If you look at it today, it's really not. It's really not separate from the rest of the land there. But this property is actually owned by the Stockbridge-Munsee community, and it's open to the public. If you ever get a chance to visit, you can find it easily on your GPS, and it's a beautiful nature trails right on the Hudson River. It's one of the last really, I don't know, undeveloped areas close to Albany anyway, that and it's a particularly important place in tribal history. And so here's the little kiosk that is at the entrance there to the nature preserve. This is Bonnie, my manager, and this is Sherry White, who today holds the title tribal liaison. So she's an important official at the tribal government in Wisconsin. And this is what the trails, some of the trails look like this. Some of them are a little wilder, but this is the main trail that goes through. Looks a little bit more like it has some vehicular traffic. But I encourage you to go there and to enjoy yourself. We did a ethnographic study and talked to folks at the tribe about Papscony Island and its importance. So here are, I'm not going to read any of this, but this is the members of the tribal community in their own words why Papscony Island is important. And we did this research as a part of an underrepresented communities grant from the National Park Service for listing Papscony Island as a National Register of Historic Places, historic district. And so we were working on this, and we had this. I think that one of the reasons our nomination was so successful is the inclusion of these ethnographic interviews with tribal members. I think it really made it stand out for what the national park usually receives. So Papscony Island is this is from a 1639 map. The Mohicans were I call them an archipelago civilization. That they occupied this series of islands up and down the Hudson River, and north is to your right, as oftentimes the maps were. North was to the right, and as you can see, it marks and this is basically Fort Orange. This island here, which is, I don't know if you can make it out as Hassel Island. This is Westerloo Island. There's actually a fort named Fort Nassau that predated Fort Orange, and that was actually located here. It is directly across the river from the very northern part of Papscony Island. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Dutch put their first outpost directly opposite Papscony Island because of the relationship with the Mohicans that they had in trade. And this is a little bit later map from 1733. This is the map of the British Empire in North America, which I just think this map is, goes all the way out to Lake Michigan. And what's really interesting with all of the coverage that this, I don't know if you can see right here, here's Papscony Island. And this depicts all of these islands that the Mohican people occupied. So I think that's a really just a testament to how important it was. So one of the first things that we did is, if any of you have ever done a National Register nomination, you have to really define what it is that you're nominating. So we had this area that, looks like a floodplain, but it doesn't really look like an island. So we needed to find historic maps and overlay that to define the island. And we actually have two islands, Papscony Island here, and this little island called Kuiper Island. It's really interesting. It turns out that even after the Mohicans sold Papscony Island, there were decades before later that they kept this island in their possession, this little island right here. And basically, we were able to define this looking at the historic maps, exactly where the island was. And you can see today, by the way, these islands, Pixtaway and Campbell, are all of this is attached, and all of this is silted in. And this is actually the earliest map that we have, from 1632, of Papscony Island and Kuiper Island. So this is very, very early. As you can see, here's Papsicany. Papsicany is actually the sachem of the village on Papscony Island. So the island was named for him, but he was actually a person. I say Papsicany. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So this map is actually the original map of the manor of Rensselaerswyck. And so Papscony Island becomes kind of the nucleus, the breadbasket, really, because of this beautiful agricultural land. It becomes the breadbasket of the Dutch settlements in what I call the Middle Hudson Valley. Well, why is this area important? Well, it actually, personally, I think, is a kind of trick of physiography. And it is basically that when Henry Hudson came up the Hudson River, which received his name, in 1609, he was only able to get up to what the Dutch called the Overslough. And this was where the river became so shallow that the Half Moon could no longer proceed upriver. And although he did send smaller craft upriver from there, that area, that Overslough, was a kind of a limit to what a deep, what maybe an ocean-going vessel could go in the Hudson. At least it needed to wait for high tide. And so when the Dutch came upriver, they had to stay in what they called the old anchorage, or de Oudry. And so they'd wait here for the tide to get high enough that they could proceed. And what that meant for Papsicany and his Mohicans on Papscony Island is that they had the contact with and the FaceTime with the Dutch, who were waiting there to proceed. And became known as the place of trade, or the place of trading. And right here, you can see where it says the Overslough, and also the Hogeberg, which is the high hill, is right here. And that is another important geographical feature, because when you're up there, man, you can see miles upriver and miles downriver. It's just a trick of geography. But I think what happened was that the Dutch and the Mohicans, who were living right here under their sachem Papsicany, had the chance to create a relationship that went on for decades. And that's why I think you see, even in 1733, way later, you still see Papsicany this island and this place and the sachem who lived there have this special place in the sort of the minds of the Dutch as they consider and think about the Mohicans in the area. So we were able to nominate Papscony Island. I think it's relatively rare under all four criteria of the National Register. So criterion D is what mostly archaeologists deal with, and that's yields or may likely to yield information about prehistory or history. And this is usually where archaeological sites come in, and we were able to nominate under this criteria. There are altogether 22 known archaeological sites on Papscony Island, 16 pre-contact, 5 post-contact, 12 were late woodland, 1 is middle woodland. Some are, we don't know exactly, but there's also 11 post-contact Euro-American sites. These are the oldest, according to Paul Huey from the Historic Preservation, formerly of the Historic Preservation State of New York. These are the oldest extant Dutch sites in the state of New York, exist here. They're multi-component. If you add these add up to way more than 22, because many of these are multi-component. Almost all of the Dutch sites have earlier native sites on them, or under them, I should say. So there's criteria D. Criteria A is historic events or activities. And here we have Henry Hudson creating that relationship with the Mohicans. There's a famous story about they were invited to the village. We don't know if it's Papscony Island or not, truly, but they recorded that they were invited to eat with native people, that they did gather there. Hudson had some terrible conflicts with other native people lower down the Hudson, probably Munsee people further south. But the Mohicans and the Dutch struck it up, maybe at Papscony Island, but at least in that area, probably within the Sachem Papsicany's influence. And they could see as night was falling, they were invited to stay, and the native people, the Mohicans there, were could see that the Dutch were getting kind of a little antsy. And the story is that they are worried, and the story is that they gathered up their bows and arrows, and they threw them in the fire to reassure the Dutch that they meant them no harm. So these kinds of stories are important in the sense that they explain why this place and why and the nature of the relationship between the Mohicans and the Dutch, which started here, and those good relations that imprint lasted for decades. Sachem Papsicany actually passes away in 1634, and the land that becomes the manor of Rensselaerwyck is sold by his heirs in 1637. So for decades, because this is 1609, for decades that relationship was passed on. And so we nominated under criterion A. We nominated under criterion B because we have both Sachem Papsicany and we also have Henry Hudson. And we also nominated under criterion C because we have a single standing Dutch stone house on the island. This is actually previously listed, but we redid the nomination because it was a terrible the way things used to be done in the 70s and so on, a nomination. We were able to write a really great nomination, sort of updating the nomination for this already listed property. This is the cemetery, by the way, on the lower right, that's in back of the house. And the oldest readable grave marker there is marked 1707. And this is actually inside. The same family who built this house still lives. Their descendants still own it, and so we would sometimes go inside, build a fire, talk, and that kind of thing. So that, and I'll just quickly go over one other project which I think is quite fun. And you might say, well, why an archaeologist looking at splint baskets? Because this is not the sort of thing that we usually do. But we were lucky enough to receive, I think it was over a very short period of time, we received 6 different sets of donations of Mohican splint baskets. And back here in our conference room, we started out with the 3. Then I came in like a week later and there were like 7. And then I came in the week after that and there were 10. And we ended up all together with 17 baskets that were donated by various folks over a very short period of time. And actually filled up this entire table plus a couch, which is on the right. And made our conference room for a little while pretty much unusable. And I said, well, we better take photographs of these, document them, and then, put them in boxes and be really careful with them. And as you can see, they do have, some of them have designs on them or painted splints, dyed splints. And I was looking at them and some of them are hard to see. Some of them are not that hard to see, but some of them are quite faded. And I thought to myself, well, when I was out in Montana, we used to use a program to look at rock art that was difficult to see. It's called D-stretch. And it enhances an image so that you can see patterns. And it's used primarily out west on pictographs. And when I was out in Montana, we worked close to a pictograph site that that was related to our work and were related to our work with the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe on the Flathead Reservation. This just gives you an example of how it can enhance an image. And I said, well, why don't we try this on a basket? And so here's this is the top of the lid and this is the side. These are not that hard to see, but the lids oftentimes are they're kind of bleached out. There's a lot of dust, I think, that has settled on them, and it ends up being kind of hard to see. But if you use the D-Stretch software, just go back and forth, it can really bring out the designs. And then I said to myself, well, why don't I try something like I'm calling it a digital restoration. So basically taking the original and trying to reconstruct what this might have looked like when it was new. And what that means is sort of we have a lot of oxidation, we have a lot of fading of the design. Let's see if we can't digitally restore this to what it might have looked like when it was new. What was the effect the artist was trying to achieve when they actually made the basket? So we went from this to this to this. So that's digitally lightening it to counteract the oxidation. this would have been a pokeberry dye. This would have been onion skin. Um, so we're doing our best to guess what the original colors may have looked like. But there we have our at least one guess at what the basket may have looked like when it was new. And we did this with other baskets that were much harder to see the designs. In this case, these designs are really fairly straightforward, but the lids oftentimes are much worse. And here you can see that the D-stretch really enhances some of these splints that were dyed. And then this is our best guess at what it looked like when it was new. And here's another one. You can barely see the designs here, but with the D-stretch, and then here's the restored basket. And we did this with a lot of the different baskets that we got. We had 17 in all. Not all of them were painted, but we did about half of them. And we did these digital restorations, and they're quite beautiful the way they may have looked when they were new. That one I think you saw. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much. I hope that was interesting.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a great talk. I really appreciate all the statistics and learning about the continued work that the Stockbridge-Munsee Community Tribal Historic Preservation Office is doing. So it's really,
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really warming.
Standing on the shoulders.
Oh yeah, thank you, thank you. You know, I really appreciate your talk about the field schools, right? And it's kind of the last stronghold of unethical practice. And I was so happy to see those pictures because I know exactly what field school you're talking about and the professor. And it's good to see that y'all have that in your possession now, and that works for it too. I guess we probably have some questions. We can start a Q&A. If people want to just raise their hands and we can go from there. Chair, do you want to go ahead?
Hi. Thanks. That was so cool to see the baskets, and I might bother you about that another time. But I did have a question. You know, for the last couple of years, we've been working on some grants with American Battlefield Protection Program. That's Stockbridge-Munsee THPO. Obviously, we worked with Nathan for Arnold's Bay, and we're working with you now for the Spitfire project. And we've got some feedback early on about you know, that we should think about developing tribal nation partnership policy at the museum. And I wondered if you could point me in any direction of places that have something like that in place. Because as it was explained to me, it's like this top-down approach that can be really overwhelming on like the tribal organizations. So I mean, our stuff was coming from National Park Service, and I think they've since sort of changed some of how that runs, which I think is great. Because before they had us, the museum institution, like talking specifically, like, or approaching the THPO. And now I think they are doing that through the National Park Service nation to nation. But I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, because I'd love to continue to develop better policy at the museum in general.
I was going to mention the National Park Service because they have some new procedure that they're trying to institute. You know, in the last 4 years under the Biden administration, there's been, I think, a lot of effort put forward, or some effort put forward, let's say, to try to come up with better ways to do consultation. The Army Corps is trying to institute some better procedure for consultation, tribal consultation. So there's some of the, we're on pins and needles because we don't know under the next administration whether some of these maybe rolled back or changed in other ways, but they've been getting better at it. It's not universal. And sometimes the state aid for us, because we're multi-state, if you count Kansas, we operate in 8 states, and every state is completely different. So, and some of them are downright terrible. So I won't say anything specifically about Vermont, but we have some issues. But yeah, I would say National Park Service and secondarily Army Corps are places where you can look to probably get some maybe templates to see what you might want to think about or adopt. Just a moment about the American Battlefields Protection Program grant. So we just received a ABPP grant for the Battle of Kingsbridge, which occurred in the Bronx. And so we're very excited. We actually have a RFP out right now for our consultant. So we're really excited about getting into that. And so, with Rev 250 coming up, it's kind of timely. I don't know if we planned it that way, but working on the Spitfire project on top of that, the Battle of Bennington, the Battle of Saratoga, and other places where Mohican militia were active. These are all like really exciting for us to explore the ways in which Mohican soldiers were involved in the Revolutionary War. It's one of the reasons why it's so cool to be involved with the Spitfire. And we're also consulting on the Philadelphia, restoration at the Smithsonian at the same time.
Yeah, that's so great. Oh, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about those projects. Thank you very much.
Giovanna, did you have a question?
I think that we kind of touched on it already. Jeff already touched on the change of administration. And after having an Indigenous person as Secretary of the Interior, the horror of what might be coming down the pike. Is there, I guess we can't cross that bridge till we get there, Jeff. I'm not sure what your thoughts are, if you have any thoughts right now.
I don't know, because we're on obviously we're on pins and needles about how things will go with the new administration. But we just don't know. Of course, Deb Haaland's appointment as Interior Secretary was a huge thing in Indian country, as you can imagine. So, that was extremely exciting, and we were always grateful, particularly because I think that as I mentioned, the National Park Service has really been in the forefront of creating good policy and process for consultation. And our relationship with the national parks is, I think, at an all-time high right now.
It's awesome.
So I'm just we're very involved, whether it's Gateway National Recreation Area, the Delaware, down in the Delaware. We talk all the time with the Roosevelt folks, with Sagamore Hill, with the battlefields, it's just fantastic, the communication that's going on now between the various units of the National Park Service. We're just really, it's just fantastic. It far better than
you can say we've come a long way, baby.
Absolutely. So where it goes from here, We just don't know.
Yeah. The big issue for me is section 106, rolling back section 106 and all the dig baby, what is it, drill baby drill, just rolling back the regulatory stuff for the states. So that I think with federal agencies like the Park Service, you might may be able to continue things maybe almost as normal. But I'm really worried about the state side, 106, what might be happening there if they say, you know, we're not doing section 106 anymore. And we're interpreting it in this incredibly narrow way that it's entirely possible depending on who you are. So that would be the worry.
Well, I'm crossing my fingers that it will be. I'm hoping that the states are somewhat, because the state historic preservation offices, they're a funny thing because of that, because they're a state agency mandated to fulfill federal law. It's a very funny jurisdictionally in a way, but I'm hoping that they're kind of insulated from changes in the federal government because they exist they're embedded in state government.
Yvonne, well, we don't have to talk about it now because it's not the topic, but I'd be curious if we have a minute afterwards, what you're hearing in the Historic Preservation Office in terms of.
Just a lot of nervousness right now. Yeah. I mean, 60% of our budget is federal, so we'll see what happens. So it's nerve-wracking. But
I do have a comment that came through in the chat from Dave Lacey when he was at the U.S. Forest Service working with Sherry White. He comments that her complaint was that agencies thought that consultation was meant really as sending along the final report once it was done. Is that still a problem for you?
Nathan, I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. Do you mean that there wouldn't be no follow-up? Is that the?
No.
And Dave, you can clarify, but go ahead.
It was sort of like the first that they would hear about a project was when they got the final report, and it was like 3 volumes sitting on Sherry's desk, and she'd go, "What do you want me to do with this?" It's like, you've already decided.
Right.
So, and yeah.
Sometimes that is a problem. Unfortunately, for example, I was doing a project today where the consultation with the SHPO's office had happened back in 21 and 22 without any section 106 consultation with us. Like, we were left out of it.
Yeah.
And the reason that I'm hearing about it in 2020, at the end of 2024, years later, is because they're applying for funds from the USDA to fund the project.
Mm-hmm.
And so the USDA is contacting me, and I'm going, where the heck did this come from? Well, it turns out the SHPO's office signed off on it over 2 years before, but we didn't know about it because we weren't consulted. So we do get these surprises, I guess you could say, and instead of consulting us in a timely fashion, you know, early on in the process where we may have been able to let our perspective be heard, we're hearing about it later, in a much later stage. I have another project that went through a similar process and ended up needing a permit, a wetlands permit from the Army Corps. And so the Army Corps contacted us, and most of that sort of working out this project with the SHPO's office, that happened in 2017. And we're only hearing about it in 2024 because they need this permit from a federal agency. So that stuff, the answer to your question is yes, that stuff still happens.
No. Well, I had a nice relationship with Sherry because I could be the go-between. We had a quarterly list of projects that were proposed and the state they were in. You know, were they just brainstorming or were they doing something on the ground? And then she could call me and get maps and a walkthrough if she wanted to come out, or I'd just say, you know, I've been there. It's a desert. And then she could give appropriate comments or requests for more information. But that was, you know, 10 years ago. So I just wondered, in between, did it get better?
She really, I like to hope that I think it must be better, but unfortunately there's still cases where something like that happens, where they're just, the procedure just wasn't followed, and we weren't included or contacted. I'm so fortunate to have Sherry, because in terms of institutional knowledge, and she's just fantastic. So, you know, I've been a little over 2.5 years in this job. And so it's, you know, things come out of the blue. She knows about and I don't. So that's it's wonderful to have her. And she's just marvelous.
We had an agreement that I didn't know enough about the Mohican and she didn't know enough about archaeology. So we would treat it as a co-learning experience instead of fighting about it, going, oh, that's how this works. Oh, anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well,
I'll unmute myself now.
You were very
I'll mute
fortunate to
myself
work
now.
with her, closely with her. She's great.
I had that privilege too. She was remarkable. We had some amazing days in the field together.
Fortunately, she's still around, and her job is really important. She's known as the tribal liaison. She has her own page on the tribe's website, and what she is the liaison to is the tribal council. So she works directly. So she, you know, for me, if I want to go up my chain, it's my manager, then the director of cultural affairs, then up to maybe the chief of staff. I don't think they call it chief of staff. They have a different name, but the tribal administrator. And then the tribal council is above that. Sherry works directly with the tribal council. So she has the direct line to the very top.
Great. Angela, you have a question?
I do. Thank you so much for this, Jeff. This was great. I was really struck by your statistics about the number of undertakings your office reviews. It's quite astronomical. I'm also thinking about the past 2 or 3 years and the new guidance that has come out from the federal government on integrating Indigenous knowledge more into federal decision-making. And I was curious whether you could comment upon the changes you feel are necessary to the Section 106 process in order to accommodate both sides of this equation, the enormous amount of undertakings that are being funded and being reviewed, and perhaps the need for a slower, more relational, consultative process to take in more holistic sources of evidence, let's say. How do we square this circle? And I'll leave out whether we get to do it in the next 4 years, but what would be kind of the 1 or 2 big changes you would like to see in order to accomplish this?
Boy, that's a tall order, and a big question. The thing that I would like to see, and maybe this is getting back at what David was saying, is that their consultation is a really idiosyncratic process. So it depends on the agency, and honestly, it also depends on the office of the agency that you're dealing with. So if it's Army Corps, I deal with a slew of different regions, and that's true for every agency. So back in my statistics where I said, I forget what it was, 22 or 18 federal agencies, but it doesn't really get at the fact that I deal with maybe 6 or 7 or 8 different offices in that particular agency. And the trouble is that they have completely different process. And some of them are decent and some of them aren't. And so for example, the Federal Highway Administration, I won't mention which state, but there's one state which is just terrible to deal with. Just awful. And then in the meanwhile, another state, the Federal Highway Administration, is great to deal with. And then I have another state where and this is true, recently they've started to really up their game. So like they have like major improvements. So this inconsistency is probably the thing I would love to see change the most. And that we get some kind of, efficient and early and often. Consult early and often is what I always say. So that's, I think, probably one thing. We're dealing with some very thorny state policy issues, things we don't agree with. We're trying to get changed. And unfortunately, SHPOs, since every single state we deal with is a different SHPO, some of them have policies that are antithetical to native interests. And I'm like, this is going to be like posted, so I'm not sure that it's good for me to mention specific states and specific policies, but we're working really hard and we're trying to change these things. It's very, very difficult. The other thing I think I'd like to mention is that, how can I put this? So this idea of indigenous knowledge, it's extremely important. But what I oftentimes see is that the different agencies they're basically saying, educate me. And that actually puts a burden on our office. We are not an educational institution, and our office, our Tribal Historic Preservation Office, really doesn't have much of an educational mission. Doing a talk like this, I probably do a half dozen a year. It's really not. I do it because I guess I probably miss being a college professor for one thing, but like to hear my own voice. I don't know, but it's not really anything very. It's a tiny, tiny little thing we do as a sideline. But unfortunately, when it comes to the agencies saying, what is your indigenous knowledge about this or that, and then you're dealing with hundreds or even thousands of inquiries, that is a real burden that is difficult for, I think, a tribal community or even a tribal government office to try to deal with. Plus all the inquiries about, give us a land acknowledgement, give us tell us what our exhibit means, help us reinterpret and remount our exhibits. All of these responsibilities being put on us is difficult. So that's another area that I'd like to see maybe there be a little bit more introspection about putting these burdens on the tribal government, on tribal offices.
Great. Are there any more questions for Jeff? Jeff, I feel like we could sit here all night having this
I'm just sitting
conversation.
here taking notes is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I want to offer a thought for Jeff that this video, for example, you did not create it. It wasn't taped specifically for education, but putting this in your arsenal, in your toolkit, so that when agencies say, who are you? What should we be doing? I think that you don't have to spend an extra minute doing a new, I mean, when you have nothing else to do, you should do a focused educational video for agencies, like a 10-minute one. But this is a wonderful thing that you've done tonight. And I just want to encourage you to make sure it's available to agencies and SHPOs and staff, because, and thank you, VAS, for doing this. It's really a wonderful resource. Thanks, Jeff and Angela and everyone, and Nathan for putting it together.
It's been fun. I appreciate talking with you. Thank you for the great questions.
Great. Well, with that then, I'll say thank you everybody for joining us. And thank you again, Jeff, for sharing more about the integral work that SMC THPO is continuing to do.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Nice to
Okay.
meet you all.
Good night, everybody.
Or
and thanks for
see you
coming out.
again.
Thank you. Thanks, Yvonne.
Bye. Thank you.
Nice to see everyone. Long time. I haven't seen many of you. It's great.
Good
Have a good
night.
night.
Good night. Good
Good
night.
night.